Hey, I'm Josh Rushing, and you're in the stream. Today, should a full-time job pay enough to cover the cost of living in your community? We look at the living wage debate in the U.S. Digital producer Malika Blau. That's a horrible English accent, isn't it? It came out like My Fair Lady. I was trying to do the Femi OK accent.
It was Femi-esque.
It was Femi-esque? Well, clearly I'm not Femi, and I cannot even imitate Femi. So, but I will be with you for the next 2 weeks.
Excited.
I'm excited too. It gets me off the road from fault lines for just a little bit. So what's the community saying today about living wage?
Well, today, the topic of today's show specifically looks at the U.S., but this is something that everyone around the world can resonate with. You know, labor rights, workers' rights, and so people around the world are tweeting in. Ibrahim in Nigeria says the living wage there is equal to about $113 a month. In Ontario, Canada, it's $10.25 hourly. And a political dissident tweets in that in the UK, it's about £6.50 for those over 25. But he writes, that's not enough to live on at all. Now, for those of you at home, we want to hear from you as well. So join the discussion. Just make sure you use the hashtag AJStream.
Thanks, Malika. I can't believe I couldn't pull off an English accent for like 2 sentences.
You were close.
I got to practice. All right, well, joining us in the studio is also Daniel Beer. He's executive editor of the Skeptical Libertarian blog. Welcome to the stream.
Glad to be here.
We'll hear from Daniel in just a bit, but we also want to hear from you. So join the conversation using Twitter. And if you're one of these people that need more than 140 characters, then hit us up on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/AJStream. Like us, please. Share your thoughts, and you may see them on the show.
Hi, my name is Anton. I live in Russia and I'm a journalist and I'm in the stream.
Can government single out a company and say it must pay workers a higher wage based on its bottom line? That's a question being asked across the United States as some push for what's being called a living wage, the amount needed to keep a worker out of poverty. Right now, Walmart, the nation's biggest retailer, is at odds with city leaders here in Washington, D.C. over a bill that would force companies that make at least $1 billion annually to pay employees around $13 an hour. While the City Council is behind the push in D.C. and other parts of the country, it's workers who are calling for a living wage. For months, protests have taken place across the country as striking low-wage workers demand higher pay.
And I just wish that the corporations could understand if we're making you so much money, how come you can't give us, a larger portion?
All these people with kids and a family, struggle. It's hard to even save for your future when you only getting enough just to put gas in your tank.
I honestly feel like I shouldn't have to get another job that makes more money. I work hard, 40 hours a week. I feel like I should get a living wage.
Yeah, many critics argue, though, that these jobs aren't meant to pay higher wages because they're entry level. They say higher pay comes as people move up with hard work. So should employers be required to meet the desire of workers to earn more? And how do you determine a living wage? We're joined by several people to help answer these questions. Skyping in today is Dorian Warren, an assistant professor at International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, where he focuses on labor issues. In our Google Plus Hangout, we're joined by Anthony Davies, an associate professor of economics at Duquesne University, Stacy Mitchell, a researcher at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and Martin Rafanen, a community organizer who's helping push for wage increases in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome everyone to the stream.
Thanks.
I want to start with you, Stacy. So you look at the effect of what some people call big box stores on communities. Can you first kind of define big box stores, and have you looked at what's happening with Walmart coming into Washington?
Yes, absolutely. I define big box stores as large chain retailers that open large stores. So you've got Walmart, Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, companies like that have really risen to dominate not only retailing but our whole economy in the last 20 years or so. And now these companies, particularly Walmart, are pushing to get into big cities. They tried to get into New York but were rebuffed earlier this year, and they're pushing to get into Washington, D.C.
Well, why shouldn't they be allowed into a city just like any other business?
Well, at this point, we actually know a lot about Walmart's impact on local economies because they've opened 4,000 stores across the U.S., and economists have looked at what happens when Walmart opens in a community. One of the things that we've learned, for example, this is from research done by an economist at the University of California, is that the average Walmart actually destroys more jobs than it creates. You know, it comes into a community and creates 200 jobs at a new store, but then if you add up all the jobs lost at competing local retailers and other chains that have to close their doors or downsize after Walmart opens, you actually end up losing more jobs than you gain.
Anthony?
We've also seen from economic research that wages go down and poverty rates rise after Walmart opens.
Anthony, why can't customers vote with their dollars here? Can't customers decide where they want to shop or where they don't want to shop?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, we blame Walmart, or the big box retailers will say things like, well, they come in and they shut down the mom and pop shops. And that's actually false. Walmart doesn't shut them down. What shuts them down are the consumers who choose to shop at Walmart instead of shopping at the mom and pop shops. So, I mean, if we want to lay blame, we lay it at the feet of the consumer. Now, the question is, well, why is the consumer doing that? The consumer is doing it because the consumer is getting more value, however the consumer perceives a value, whether it's price or it's ease of shopping or whatever. But it's the consumer that is choosing to shut down the mom and pop shops by shopping at the big box retailers.
So, Anthony, why can't Walmart pay a living wage?
Well, I think when we ask questions like why can't you pay a living wage, we've got the causality backward. A wage is not a lever that sets value. It's a metric that reflects value. So if you've got a worker who's earning less than the living wage, it's because that worker's labor or whatever it is the worker's doing isn't worth enough. So to get the causality right, you've got to focus on the real problem. The real problem is getting the value of the worker's labor up, and you do that through getting the worker experience, education, these sorts of things.
I would say that that's incorrect. I'm sorry. I mean, my feeling is that we're, as consumers, also subsidizing these workers. If they can't make enough money to pay for the basic necessities of life, who is going to come in and pay for those basic necessities? I come out of a social service background. I ran a homeless shelter for 6 years, and 2 out of the 5 women in our building were working these low-wage jobs. So I would contend that what these big box stores are doing are using extra dollars from consumers and government programs and social service programs to support their high profits.
Can I jump in here?
Wait, let's go back to Anthony, because I think that was directed right at Anthony. And I'd like to add in, Anthony, it seems like, let's take Walmart, for example. They have the money to pay more wages. It doesn't have to be passed on to the consumer in some way. If you look, and I have this pulled up on my screen now, at the richest Americans, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, are all part of the Walton family. I mean, could these folks afford to be just a little bit less of billionaires? I mean, maybe they could be numbers 20 through 30 and pay the employees a little bit more.
Well, maybe, but I haven't done the math recently, but the last time I did it, you come up with something like, if you take all of the money that the Waltons have and divide it up amongst all their workers, you don't get a tremendous impact, because you're talking about, well, a few very rich people, you're talking about a tremendous number of workers. And even if you were to do that, you're missing the point.
Dude, they have over $100 billion between like 4 of them.
But this is a one-shot deal. Suppose we took all of their money and handed it out to the poor. And let's suppose it's enough money that you can live on. Fine, so you can live this year. What are we going to do next year? We haven't addressed the problem. And the problem is you've got workers whose labor isn't valuable enough to earn a living off of. And so the answer is do something to make that labor.
I think Anthony has a very good point there, because ultimately the problem is, getting workers the kinds of jobs that will get them experience that will help them later in life. My first job, I didn't work at that store for the rest of my life, but it gave me valuable skills, that signal to future employers that, I'm committed, that I'm hardworking, that I can show up to work on time. And so I think it's fundamentally about education and human capital. It's about getting experience so that you can earn more in the future. And I think minimum wage laws by creating more unemployment, they make it more difficult to get those skills.
We're hearing a lot of disagreements here, and that's being echoed online, of course. Khalid tweets in, raising the minimum wage means higher company expenses, potentially causing a stagnation in business expansion. So this, of course, is anti-living wage. But then, on the other hand, Martin, there's a tweet from Tart Queen who says, raising the minimum wage and a living wage is good for everyone. Employers won't admit it, but more money in their employees' pockets means ultimately more profits for them. That's echoed. Abdikader says, raising the minimum wage is not only good for the workers, but also the economy as a whole. There's more consumer purchasing power. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly you put money into the hands of low-wage workers and they're going to spend it. They're going to spend it in their community. And what we need to move is consumer spending. What we need to do is increase that. That moves and builds our economy. It's not if we don't have an increase in that spending and don't have an increase in consumers who are willing to put their money into the economy, then the economy remains stagnant and we've got a drag on what's going on. If we put dollars into the hands of low-wage workers, most certainly those workers are going to spend that money in our communities.
Hey, Dorian, is there a place in the economy for entry-level workers that are where you can have a pay that doesn't necessarily support a family, that you start out at that job and then you move up with hard work?
Look, that was a 20th century economy. We no longer have that economy. 7 of the 10 fastest growing jobs are low-wage jobs. There is not the same level of mobility that we've had in the past. And in fact, if you look at recent college graduates, more than half are in jobs for which they're overeducated for. So the notion that somehow the way we did it in the last century is what's happening now is totally over. We are the least mobile country of all rich democracies today. We don't have job ladders. We are killing our middle class. There is no mobility. So all that is false. And by the way, on the minimum wage, it's interesting. In 2005, Walmart's CEO came out in support of an increase in the national minimum wage. Now, why would he do that? It's because they understood that they weren't having enough customers with enough money in their pockets to keep their profits going. So on some level, the minimum wage is actually good for Walmart. And in the past, they've said so.
But that's not why they did it.
Yeah.
The reason they did it is because Walmart was already paying, on average, more than the minimum wage.
Well, Walmart claims it pays $12.78 now, so it shouldn't have a problem paying $12.50 in DC. If that's
no, but you're missing the point. By raising the minimum wage, what Walmart's doing is making it more expensive for the competitors to compete with Walmart, because on average, the competitors were paying less than Walmart was. It was a ploy to push the competition out of the market.
Stacy, does it hurt the mom and pop businesses if Walmart comes in and pays more money? Because won't it be a brain drain where all the best employees will want to work for Walmart rather than the mom and pop stores?
Well, according to the U.S. Census, independent retailers, small independent retailers actually pay more than large retailers do at this point. You know, I think the notion that, I think one of the things we have to remember, and I really want to take issue with this idea that Walmart has risen to dominance solely because of consumer choices. I mean, the fact is that Walmart has been aided and abetted by a host of government policies and subsidies. This is a company that picks up multi-million-dollar subsidies almost everywhere it has built stores. This is a company that gets huge tax advantages, state and federal income tax advantages through offshore tax havens. And it's a company that offloads some of the costs of not paying its workers a subsistence wage to taxpayers. Studies out recently have suggested that it's several $1,000s in public assistance for every single Walmart worker in this country.
So Dan, aren't taxpayers subsidizing Walmart's enormous profits by covering the expenses that their employees can't afford to pay?
I think that's a fundamental confusion about what wages are actually for. Like, when an employee is hired by Walmart, they're hired to perform a particular service, and they're paid for it based on what Walmart thinks that service is worth. Now, if that service is not enough based on a 40-hour work week to live whatever you think is a decent life, if we have a responsibility on that count, our responsibility is as a society to provide social welfare programs, maybe a basic minimum income, but it's not Walmart's responsibility in particular any more than it's the responsibility of their neighbors or their family.
But doesn't every company have an inherent desire to drive down the wages in order to make more profit?
Sure.
So without a minimum wage, they'd be happy to tell people your labor is only worth $1 an hour rather than whatever it is now.
That's absolutely true. You know, employers are always looking for ways to reduce cost, but they can't. You know, if an employer pays someone less than what their labor is actually worth, that employee has the option to go to a different store, which will pay them more. It's the competition among employers that keeps wages at their market rate, which keeps employees paid at what their labor is worth.
Without the minimum wage today, do you believe that employees would be paid more money or less money than they are now?
I think it would depend on who the employees were. I think it would, without a minimum wage, who is employed will change. The minimum wage protects more skilled, more educated workers from lower skilled, less educated competition, which is why, I believe Stacy mentioned that small retailers do pay more for their workers. And that's why they often support a minimum wage, is because it will force up costs for their competitors, and it will protect their store from competition from lower wage workers.
I want to bring in an interesting point of view here from Stephanie on Twitter. She says the problem is that certain jobs aren't considered valuable, but we still need people to do those jobs. Why not pay properly then? And on the back of that, Dorian, I want you to listen to this video comment about the status of workers today in the U.S.
In a challenging financial climate, the impetus for a business should be on efficiency and improvement and survival through investment back into its workforce, the most important asset of a business. Resisting minimum wage increase is both counterproductive to growth and efficiency, but also it's a false economy, and at worst, it's labour exploitation. Businesses should focus on improving efficiency to cope with this, rather than resist this.
So Dorian, he says the most important asset of businesses is their workforce. Is that true today for most companies in the U.S.?
It is, and in fact, there's a great study out of MIT that shows that companies that invest in their workers, that actually pay a higher wage, a living wage, result in less turnover and higher productivity of their workforce, and especially in the retail sector. So it's not as if we don't have other models out there. We do have high road models of how retailers treat their employees and invest in them. So the Costco example is one that people hold up often. So it can be done. It's not as if it can't be done. But let me add this. We're talking about the minimum wage, which is the law. We can't even get Walmart to pay a minimum wage. It just settled 2 huge cases, one last May with the Department of Labor for basically cheating its own workers out of minimum wage and overtime, about $4.83 million. In 2008, it settled a $640 million wage theft lawsuit because it didn't pay its workers the minimum wage. So once Walmart starts adhering by the law in the first place, then let's have this conversation. Until we get all these companies to actually adhere by the law, let's not debate whether the minimum wage results in job loss. How about they pay a minimum wage first, so the government doesn't have to come in and try to force them to do what they should be doing automatically?
Let's cast the light a little wider than just Walmart. Let's talk about McDonald's. Anthony, is there a problem with the fact that the CEO of McDonald's makes what 580 fry cooks make?
Well, think of it this way. How many fry cooks does McDonald's need to cook its hamburgers versus how many CEOs? We only need one CEO, but my guess is they need thousands of fry cooks. So if you add up the total money that's paid to all the fry cooks, I'm sure it dwarfs the money that's paid to the CEO. The driving difference there is how many do you need of each person. I think what's very telling is if you look at the history of the minimum wage in the United States, as the minimum wage has gone up, if you look at unemployment amongst college graduates, no effect. If you look at unemployment amongst high school graduates, unemployment goes up. If you look at unemployment amongst high school dropouts, it goes up tremendously. What's happening is, as we raise this minimum wage, we're pushing out of the workforce these low-skilled, low-educated workers. This is who we're trying to help with the minimum wage.
That's absolutely wrong. I mean, the minimum wage in real terms was at its highest in the 1960s, when unemployment was quite low, and indeed the most robust period of prosperity in U.S. history, from the end of the war through the 70s, was a time when, when we had a robust middle class, and where the difference between, the people working at the bottom and the highest paid was much, much narrower than it is now. I mean, that period of history would really seem to argue for policies that would bring wages up for workers at the bottom.
Wait, let me jump in. I want to ask something here. Stacy, is this also a gender issue? Because about half of the people receiving minimum wage, which is 1% of the workforce, are adult women. Another 14% are teenage girls. So something like 64% of the people receiving minimum wage are women. And that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So is this a gender issue, Stacey?
It is driving the poverty among women and women with children. And I think the other really important fact that you just mentioned was adult. I mean, a lot of people think minimum wage jobs are for teenagers, but actually most of the people who hold those jobs are adults.
I would.
Well, Dan, you made that point that they were teenagers, but when you look at the stats from the government, 48% are women, adult women, 27% are adult men. These aren't entry-level workers.
Right. When you look at the percentage, there's much more. There are many more adults working than teenagers, which distorts the statistics. Less than 3%, about 3% of people over age 25 make the minimum wage. It's not very many. As a proportion of the overall labor force. The people who are, most affected by the minimum wage are the young, they are the less educated and the less skilled. And I think it's, fundamentally unfair to take away job opportunities from them.
Let's take a look at, on that one, I would say look at the job force or the workforce of an organization like these very successful fast food organizations. We know that the average age of a fast food worker in the United States is 29 years old. We know that 66% of the fast food workers are women, age 32 with children. So these are career jobs. These are not entry-level jobs anymore. These are jobs where people need to make a living to take care of the basic necessities of their lives and where they have to support their families.
Malika, what's the community say?
Well, this is something that you touched on earlier when you brought up the Forbes list, but it'd be remiss if I didn't say our community has picked up on this big, this is from Facebook. Freddie says, executive salaries and bonuses have risen profoundly over the past 20 years, and workers' wages have stayed stagnant. It's funny how that doesn't hurt companies. Yet if the minimum wage goes up a few dollars, that's what's going to hurt the company and the consumer. Daniel, your thoughts on that?
Well, my argument there is, I'm not here to defend Walmart or any big box corporation. They'll survive if they don't open 6 stores in D.C. The people who are really going to be hurt are, the people in Ward 7 who are underserved by grocery stores. They have very few options as consumers, and the unemployment rate is almost 14%. When you raise the minimum wage, you drive away jobs and opportunities, and you take away choices of the poor.
But at the end of the day, and what this reference, the people that won't be hurt are the big box employers.
And this is exactly where we're going to start when we go to the post show. So look, we're leaving this thing right in the middle. You've got to go to your computers. You've got to log in, stream.aljazeera.com, because we've run out of time for the conversation here. So I'm going to see you online in the post show. But first, here's Malika with a look at some of the other stories that we're following.
The most requested story from our community today is from Nigeria, where a battle is unfolding over whether married underage girls should be considered adults. An effort to change a constitutional clause on adulthood was met with opposition from 34 senators, including one who married a 13-year-old girl. Critics of the current language say the clause leaves the status of child brides in doubt. Nigerians expressed opposition to the clause, both online and off, using hashtag #ChildNotBride and organizing petition signings around the country. Our next leads from Australia, where the Department of Immigration has posted pictures about a new asylum law, sparking criticism of insensitivity. The law requires all refugees arriving by boat to be processed and resettled in Papua New Guinea. The government site posted pictures of distraught asylum seekers who were the first to be transferred out of Australia. When netizens criticized the decision to post the pictures, but others saw an unintended benefit. Fergal tweets, only positive about posting photos of distressed people being transferred. You can't deny the humanity of those pictured. And our final leads from China, where a viral video highlights what many Chinese see as preferential treatment for foreign nationals.
的简称若分为外国人和外地人，同样是外，一个在人们心中高端。
The video points out differences between how citizens and expats are treated in Beijing on issues like taxes and law enforcement. The video has the web in China buzzing with personal stories about encountering disparate treatment. Chinasmack.com translated commentary. One commenter writes, "The foreigner in my office has violated traffic regulations over 100 times, but the moment they see he's a foreigner, they let him go." Be sure to keep us updated on these stories and others you're following using hashtag AJStream. Josh?
Thanks, Malika. On Tuesday, Do we all have a racist tendency inside of us and don't realize it? We look at the racial discrimination in the U.S. So stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Welcome to the Stream's online post show. We're continuing our conversation about low-wage jobs in the U.S. Still with us are Daniel Beer, the executive editor of the Skeptical Libertarian blog, Dorian Warren, assistant professor of international and public affairs at Columbia University, Anthony Davies, associate professor of economics at Duquesne University, Stacy Mitchell, the senior researcher at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and Martin Ruffanen, a community organizer in St. Louis, Missouri. All right, so let me see. I think we left off with you were making a point, Malika.
Yes,
so why don't
about
we get right back to that?
Executive salaries, because you were answering it and then you kind of veered off a little bit. So I want you to get back to this point about executive salaries and bonuses, which have risen. They're not being hurt, which is what the point our Facebook commenter was making.
Yes, that's true, but I think the focus on executive salaries is, you know, executives are not the reason why people are in low-wage jobs. I mean, they're not taking money away from low-skilled workers. The reason why low-skilled workers make low wages is because they tend to be less experienced, they tend to have less education. So I think the solution is more education, allow them to gain the skills and gain the experience that will allow them to command higher salaries in the future. And I think when you raise the minimum wage, you just take away a ladder on their effort to improve their lives. And I think that's not fair, and economically it's not justifiable.
Martin, what do you think about that?
I don't agree. I mean, if you need, in order to get an education, in order to improve your life, you need the opportunity to be able to meet the basic necessities of your life and pay for education and pay for the opportunities to improve your life. These low-wage workers are trying to get by day to day, and they don't even have what it takes to get by day to day. That's why they need government assistance and other kinds of social service support. So in order for a person to improve, to build their education, to strengthen themselves in terms of the economy, they need some more support for that effort, and it needs to come from these companies which can well afford to increase those salaries.
Anthony, it does seem like a straw man argument to me, because I never hear McDonald's and all the money they spend on lobbying to make sure that the minimum wage isn't raised, that they're spending that money on lobbying for the good of those employees, for the good of those fry cooks. I mean, it seems pretty obvious they're spending it so that McDonald's can make greater profits. And the trend I mentioned before, it was that a CEO makes what 580 fry cooks makes. 20 years ago, the difference was only 230 fry cooks to one CEO. So you can see that the CEO salaries are growing and that the fry cook's salary is staying the same. Isn't there an issue with that for any economy that wants to grow as well?
Well, my question is, why isn't there just even an equal raising of wages? When you raise the wage of the CEO, why don't we see some growth in the wage of the lowest paid workers? We're seeing those workers remain at a very stagnant level, while management salaries go through the roof.
Well, there's a minimum wage, but not a maximum wage, right? We're open-ended on the maximum wage side. But Auntie, I want to give you a chance to respond, because I was throwing that question to you.
One of the things we're losing sight of, we talk about the minimum wage. The minimum wage really isn't $7.25 an hour. The minimum wage is zero. That's the wage you get when the employer says you're not worth however much the minimum wage is, therefore you don't have a job anymore. You get zero. One of the things we have to keep in mind is we think of the minimum wage as being a restriction on the employer. It's equally well interpreted as a restriction on the worker. That is, I would love to make $20 an hour, but if my choice is not $20 an hour, but between $7.25 and zero, it's my life, it's my body, I get to choose what I do. And if the minimum wage comes along, let's say we put it at $10 an hour, all of a sudden you've taken that choice out of my hands. You have said to me, you may not sell your labor for less than $10 an hour. That's not right.
But
that notion that we're going to lose jobs is not true in retail, because retail spending is a function of how much people need. You know, it's not going to change the fact that I need groceries, that I need new clothes, that I need all of these things that I need. And in fact, by raising incomes for people at the bottom, and folks at the bottom of the ladder tend to spend the new money that they earn because they have unmet needs right now, we actually are going to grow the retail pie. You know, I think the real problem here that we've been sort of skirting around is we've got this economy that is creating so many jobs at the bottom and no really middle-class jobs. And where is that coming from? And a lot of that's coming from Walmart and other big retailers who have, you know, really systematically undercut these key segments of the middle class. You know, they've driven millions of manufacturing jobs overseas. They've killed off tens of thousands of family-supporting small businesses, and all they've given us in return are these really low-wage jobs working at their stores. And the only way we can really solve that is by pushing back and as citizens saying, you know what, there's a minimum. If you want to operate in the United States, if you want to operate in Washington, D.C., you have to support at least a subsistence living.
Okay, let me throw a graphic into this discussion here, guys. All right, we're going to put this up on the screen. This is something put out by McDonald's, and it's a sample budget for their employees, and it shows they make $1,100 on their first job and almost $1,000 on their second job. So they have $2,000 a month, and this is how they should spend it. I mean, this has gone around and gone a bit viral online because they've left out things like food. But one of the things to point out is the government says that it takes something like $2,500, I think, for the national average to get by. McDonald's is saying you can get by on $1,200. It's about half of what the government actually says. Has anyone here seen this go around online? Anyone have an opinion about it?
Yeah,
Well,
I've seen it.
We've seen it.
You've seen it?
Absolutely.
Well, and Dorian, you've seen it?
I haven't seen it, no.
You haven't, but Martin, you have?
The interesting thing is that McDonald's is actually admitting that it's impossible to survive on their full-time job.
But Martin, you're not supposed to survive on that job. It's just an entry-level job for a kid. Right?
Well, I just told you why that's not the case, where most of these workers are adults. Most of these workers are using this as a job, as a career. These are jobs that aren't going to China. These are jobs that are in our communities. They're good jobs. They need to be jobs that pay a reasonable wage so that these workers can take care of the basic necessities of their life. And so when McDonald's puts a budget up and says, number one, you can't survive on our pay, so go out and get another 40-hour job to try to survive. And then here's your expenses. Don't worry about such things as food or heat. We're not going to talk about that. I mean, they don't even look realistically at what is required to live your life. And so while they're building massive, while McDonald's builds $5.5 billion in profits a year, they cannot raise even a little bit the income for their workers. I mean, they can afford it.
Hey, Dorian, come in here and make a connection with me between the lowest workers and the amount of profits that we're throwing around here. I mean, the fact that McDonald's. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of studies that show, for instance, if Walmart really wanted to pay a living wage, it could increase prices by 1-2%, pass them on to consumers. The average shopper would only experience roughly a $4 or $5 increase in how much they pay for goods, while 1.4 million workers would get an immediate raise. So there's a way in which everybody could benefit from an increase in the minimum wage. It's not as if you're taking directly from the Walton family. Yes, they are the richest people, some of the richest people in the world. There's a way in which you can create a much more sustainable middle class that doesn't come out of the profits of a company. Now, here's the other thing. We've been talking about theories and economic theories and the data. Let's look at real-world examples. San Francisco raised its citywide minimum wage to $10.55 an hour. It did not, the sky didn't fall in San Francisco. In fact, it had greater growth than all the surrounding counties, which did not pass a citywide minimum wage increase like San Francisco did. That's a real-world example that you can't dismiss with theory, that you can't dismiss with so-called data, because the data is in the real-life example of what happened to San Francisco businesses and employees.
Dan, can you dismiss it?
I can't dismiss every single study. The question is who is being employed. I think that's really the fundamental issue here. When you increase the minimum wage, you don't see the workers who never get hired. You don't see the people who, just put off going into the labor force for another few years. And that has long-run implications on their wage earning ability. This has been well documented. And I think it's very unfortunate to hear people say that just by mandating an increase in the minimum wage, we can affect increase people's incomes. What it does is it doesn't take money away from the Waltons in particular. It takes money away from other low-skilled, low-income families who can't get that job. It takes money away from other low-income families and gives it to other ones. It's redistribution among the poor, not from the rich to the poor.
You know what's funny about that argument? 100 years ago, this was the exact same argument we heard when we were trying to end child labor in this country. The exact same argument. Nothing's changed in 100 years, right? It was, you're going to hurt the very people that you're trying to help. You're going to hurt poor families because those kids need to be working to earn an income for their families.
Hey, Dorian.
Exact same arguments. We made
look, dude, I got to wrap this up.
Country to end child labor, and we should make a moral choice to make sure everyone has a living wage.
I tell you what, throw that on Twitter. Put AJ Stream on it so that we can continue this conversation on Twitter, on Facebook. But we've got to wrap it up here for now. I want to thank Daniel, Dorian, Anthony, Stacy, and Martin for joining me today. On Tuesday, do we all have a racist inside of us and we just don't realize it? We look at racial discrimination in the U.S. and why many are unaware that they're part of the problem. Until then, we'll see you online.